Now, when he walks up that scale, that is basically, it's going from that 10th fret of the D string to the 8th fret and 9th fret of the G string. Then the 8th fret of the B string to the 11th fret of the B string. Then he pivots off from the 9th fret of the E string back down to the 11th fret of the B string to the 8th fret of the E string to the 11th fret of the B string. So it's... I'm sorry, he doesn't go back down to that 11th fret. He then rolls his finger from that 8th fret down to the 8th fret of the B string. So... And then he goes back up to that 11th fret of the B string. So that whole thing slow is... Then he resolves on that 9th fret of the B string. Now, that whole first section of Walk Up was... And that was all over your C minor chord. Now, again, you have your root, your minor third, major third. You have your fifth, the flat 7. This could look all at a pentatonic scale, except for that note, which is you're very familiar with the minor-major transition. So it's all minor pentatonic, except for the major third. Then he throws in that outside note again, which is your flat 9. Which is very dissonant. But then it comes right back in, and that's all pentatonic. So he kind of steps outside, and then he resolves to that note, which is over your F minor chord at that point, and that's basically your minor third. So it's just a really good trick of throwing in an outside note, and then right before you're about to go to the next chord, and then you resolve on a really strong chord tone. So that whole thing is... and even that note right there is a very strong note. It's the 5th of F minor. So those two notes basically are the 9th fret of the B string. Then he plays twice the 10th fret of the D string. That whole thing. And that note, when he gets on that minor third, he does a pre-bend there. And the next part, he plays that 9th fret again, but then he pulls up before he pulls off that note. So it's pulling from the 9th fret to the 8th fret, but right before he does that, he pulls the bar up. And then he goes down, just like he did with this note, down a half step. He goes down this note with a half step. So that's the 8th fret on the B string and the 9th fret on the D string. So the first note was, the next note is, or the next two notes. And now he's just, this whole pattern that he goes into, he's just running down 6th intervals. So... What's cool about this is it follows the chords, because at this section it's basically going from the F minor chord for 2 measures to the C minor, then it goes for a measure to the A flat 7 to the G 7 back to the C. But that whole time, he's running down these 6 intervals. And he's starts adding a few more notes. And there's some rests in there and stuff, and I'll try and get this in tab form so that you can actually see what's going on. But right now, let me just go through the rest of those notes. Let me just dive down the 6 intervals where he goes, and then we'll talk about the chords that he's playing these over. All right, so basically I'm going to quickly just run through these 6 intervals because it's the same shape, just moved down either a whole step or a half step. And I won't go over each individual note. I'll just say the first one starts on the 9th fret of the B string, and you play the 10th fret of the D string. So that's your shape, okay? So the next one goes down a half step. So your first finger's on the 8th fret of the B string. Then you go down a whole step. Your first finger's on the 6th fret of the B string. It goes down another whole step to the 4th fret of the B string. Then it goes down a half step to the 3rd fret to the 2nd fret, which is another half step. And that phrase basically sounds like this. It goes, let me see. Okay, so he starts throwing in 3 notes instead of 2 notes. Right here it's... There's 2 notes on that one. Then when he goes down to the 6th fret, it's... he starts with the 3 notes in the bass note. Then this is where he actually slides this note from the 6th fret to the 4th fret on the B string. And then he plays 3 of those notes again. Then here, when he plays this note on the 4th fret, he actually pulls that bar up again before he slides down that half step. Then he plays the bass note 3 times again, and then he goes, and there's a rest between that note there and that note. Now, to talk about what these intervals mean over the chords that it's playing, again, the first one is over that F minor chord, which is the minor 3rd and the 5th, right? Then he does the bar, and he goes down here to this, and that's still over the F note, which he's playing basically a 9th to a flat 5. So it kind of gets a little dissonant there. So you have... Those 2 notes sound great. That note sounds great. Gets a little dissonant. Then it goes to the C minor chord, and he plays this note, which that first note is just your 4th or your 11th. Sounds fine. And that's a major 6th. Then the next note he plays is, again, your 3rd and 5th. So all those notes sound great over that. Then he goes to this, and that's over your A flat chord. And that's basically your flat 5. And this note is your flat 7. So over dominant chord, you have your flat 7 and your flat 5, which gives you kind of an altered out sound. Okay? And then it goes to the G7. And now that's down a half step again, so that gives you the same exact thing as it did over this A7 chord. It gives you your flat, it gives you your flat 5 and your dominant 7. So that's, I know that was a long discussion on 6 intervals, but that's a typical thing Scott Henderson does, which is basically taking a motif and walking it down in half steps or whole steps, depending on what chord is going on. And he's coming up with those cool chord tones. Again, getting that flat 5 in there to give it kind of a dissonant sound. Anyway, so work on that. Let's play that one more time through. That whole thing is... So what he does there is he plays the open fret of the D string to the first fret of the D string to the third fret of the the third fret of the E string to the first fret of the E string. So that's, he plays twice on that first fret. And when he plays that F note, he actually pulls up and down real quick. Not the whole thing, just a little bit, like a quarter step or something. And he sits on that note, and then right before he ends that note, he pulls it all the way up again. So that whole thing is... So just to touch on those notes that he played, he was playing over the C minor chord there, and these notes are basically, you have your 9th of C minor to your minor 3rd to your 5th down to your 4th. And then he goes up what's kind of like a string skipping arpeggio, but if you look at it, it's really it's intervals, 6th intervals, and then the last one is a 3rd interval, but the first 2 are 6th intervals. You have your 3rd fret on the C note, the root note, on the A string, so 3rd fret A string, skip the D string, you play the 2nd fret of the G string, then you skip the B string and you go to the 1st fret of the E string, so that's, and then you play the 5th fret of the E string, so that's, and what that is, it's basically you have your major 6th interval, then you have a minor 6th interval, and then this interval here is basically this, which is a major 3rd. And that's actually a really cool concept, running up intervals instead of a full-on arpeggio, major root, major 3rd, and 5th, and then doing that, you know, like sweep picking, anything like that. It's just, it's a cool concept. Don Mock talks about that. He has a book called Artful Arpeggios, and he gets into all the major, minor, dominant, augmented arpeggios and everything, and then he starts doing, at the end of the book, he actually gets into arpeggios based off of intervals, and it's really cool. If you haven't checked out that book, I don't know if it's still in print, it's been quite a while, but I'm sure you could find it.